Okay. And there's a lot of different spins on how to uh, define a myth and what is a food myth. So I tried to actually cover a lot of different areas. So let's get started. And I'm always open to questions or anything for clarification. In fact, I invite you all to give me some of your myths. Okay, so first slide. She says, trying to find the place to go to the next slide. Okay. Myth number one, all fat is bad. Actually, I've had the pleasure of doing nutrition workshops with RSS for a while. And I think we did one a couple of years ago on what's old is new again and what are the updates on dietary recommendations. Fat is not all bad. In fact, the fact that we have such a emphasis on fat-free or fat substitute or low fat or all those banners, first of all, I think is not necessarily a health recommendation so much as a seizing the opportunity by food marketing. And if you look at statistics, even though this is the trend in the airwaves, most Americans, most of us all, are not really eating low fat or fat free. Probably those of us on today's session are, but in general, the population isn't. So if we had to caution about fat, it would be avoid to the best of your ability trans fat. Trans fat is a kind of fat that means it's been slightly altered in order to protect it from going rancid. And rancidity occurs when fat is exposed to either air or sunlight or heat. And if you are in the industry and you want to keep your product on the shelf with good flavor and good texture and no off smells, you're probably going to use a hydrogenated fat, which produces these things called the trans fat bonds. And that means if you have it in chips or pastries or cookies, a lot of things that probably we should be eating a scarcity of, but that's where you're going to find trans fats. You will see on the nutrition facts label the word trans fat is underneath total fat and saturated fat, and usually the number is 0. And that 0 is sometimes possible because the manufacturer's serving size could be small enough so that the amount of trans fat is less than a half a gram. If it's less than a half a gram, it can be published as 0. But if you eat 5 servings, you're going to get obviously more than less than a half a gram. Anyway, the other good fats, because that's important, is to remind ourselves, are the monounsaturated fat rich foods, which are the fats of nuts and seeds, avocado, and also the fat of most fish. Most fish is actually low fat anyway. Fish that has a generous amount of fat often will have monounsaturated fat. And why is that? Well, I was once described to me by somebody who had far more experience with fish and oceanography, is that fish migrate through the cold waters of the world. And it turns out that a saturated fat, which is the one we're cautioned not to eat, a saturated fat gets hard at refrigerator temperatures. And a refrigerator temperature is the temperature of most cold ocean waters. Your refrigerator is at 40 degrees or lower. I don't remember the details from watching the Titanic movie, but the water was colder than 40 degrees that night. Anyway, if you are a fish and you're migrating through cold water, you do not want the fat on your body to get hard and firm. So most of the fat on fish is going to stay supple and loose at refrigerator temperatures, and that's usually monounsaturated fat. Next one. Here's another myth. Fresh fruits and vegetables are better than frozen or canned. And we actually did another nutrition seminar on the differences between them. And most of the time, we get a little worked up by saying, well, canned vegetables have a lot of salt. And one of the ways to reduce that salt is to rinse away the liquid in the canned vegetable. And I offer the, pardon me, the alternative choice, which is consider how much salt is in your overall menu from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep. And if you're generally eating pretty low sodium foods, which are most fruits and vegetables anyway, or meat foods that haven't been processed, you're probably eating a low sodium overall menu. So if you happen to eat something which is canned, the sodium content of that can is not going to make your diet go crazy. It's not going to drive your blood pressure high because you're looking at the big picture, not just the portion. And as I note here, most of us don't get the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables. Remember, the goal is 5 a day, the color way. So 5 a day, the color way on fruits and vegetables says every day eat at least a mouthful of a fruit or vegetable that is one of the 5 colors, and they are red, white, blue, green, and orange. Orange could be yellow. So if you will be skipping out on your veggies because they're canned, you're actually getting the benefit. You're losing out on some benefit. So my goal is to remind you the vegetable that you or fruit that you eat and swallow is the healthy one. And the one that stays on the plate is it's not providing you with any extra benefit. So remember 5 a day, the color way. Time for the water. Something red, tomato, apple, cherry tomato, something white, something blue. White could be garlic, the inside of an onion, the inside of a potato, inside of a pear. Red, white, blue, blue, purple, grapes, cabbage, then orange or yellow, which is pretty straightforward, and green. Next, myth number 3. Okay. Oh, sorry. You can't get enough protein from eating a plant-based diet. That's a myth. To say it to read this entire slide to you is kind of unnecessary. We have had such great presentations here in the Center for the Plant-Based Initiative. Everyone should know by now. I think the bias is that you have different kinds of amino acids. You have ones that are called essential, meaning that they have to be in your diet because your body can't make them, and then the ones called non-essential. And if you eat a piece of chicken or fish or veal or beef or pork or lamb or egg or milk product, you're always getting the essential amino acids. Just before I started, my husband inadvertently burned something in the toaster, and so the smoke is still around, and I'm trying to pretend it's not bothering me. Okay, so the plant foods that we eat, like lentils and other beans, and seitan, which is a protein food based on gluten, and the peanut butter and stuff like that, usually do not have all the essential amino acids. However, when you combine them with other foods, pardon me, you get that essential blend. And on top of that, soy foods like tofu, edamame, there's a few other soy products that are fermented. It's a quirk of nature in that soybeans have all the essential amino acids just like animal foods do. So you can get enough plant protein, enough total protein by eating purely plant-based sources. But then everybody gets their panties in a bunch over, wait a minute, I thought soy was somehow dangerous. And here's the deal. The soybean is a great source of protein. Pardon. It also has these hormone-like molecules that are very weak. They're like, I think I could say with confidence, 1/100th the power of estrogen replacement. But some think that if you eat a lot of soy, you're incorporating your estrogen-like activity in your body, and that may not be productive if you are someone who's had breast cancer, or if you're a male who does not want to develop breasts. But all the studies do not show that you have a higher rate of breast cancer or a return of breast cancer or any male changes in body because of soy consumption. And in many parts of the world, people eat soybeans and drink soy milk all the time. So it's like anything. You don't want to drink a gallon of soy milk a day, not any more than a gallon of cow's milk. And soy is also, as we said, a great source of protein. Even in the dietary guidelines for Americans, it's recommended that since soy milk is calcium fortified, it can easily be selected to replace cow's milk in an overall diet. If you're having oat milk or rice milk or almond milk, they are usually not calcium fortified, so you're missing out on that nutrient. It doesn't mean you shouldn't buy them if you prefer their taste or you are bothered by cow's milk, or it's just something that's the way you want to do it. That's fine. You can get calcium from lots of other foods. Okay, next. Myth number 5. Organic produce is more nutritious than non-organic. So the definition is that organic means that it has been grown without the use of synthetic, or in other words, human produced pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizer. And there are different laws around different states that determine when a food can be called organic. And sometimes applying for it and getting permits and such is very expensive. So there might be small farmers that are organic but aren't listed. There could also be how many years has your soil been without the incorporation of synthetic pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides and fertilizers. If it's only 3 years, that's one state may have that rule. Another state may say 1 year is good. Okay, so aside from fussing about how do you define organic, I would say organic is going to be better because it will simply relieve you of the sense of, am I taking in something which way down the line could be an adverse health? My health. In that case, if it's not financially out of reach, then yeah, it could be better. Is it better for the earth? I'd say yes. And so that's another good reason to use it. Now, at the bottom of the screen are 2 references that are put together by a group called an Earth Environmental Work Group. One is called the Dirty Dozen, and it suggests these are the top 12 foods in the food supply that have the highest pesticide burden. So I would say most agricultural producers are not trying to poison people. They're just trying to get yield. And they're trying to take out the things that are going to impair the ability to produce the most of a vegetable or fruit possible. So to some extent, the Dirty Dozen is not fair. And the Clean 15 is good. The Clean 15 says these are the 15 food crops that do not have a high pesticide burden. So I'd say look into them. And if you're all about shopping locally, farmers market, or supporting a local economy, organic whenever you can afford it, and not organic because it's still the benefit of eating produce almost always outweighs a danger of a almost sometimes immeasurable amount of pesticide residue. Okay, next one. Myth number 6. You should avoid all processed food. So then we have to once again fuss over what do we mean by processed. I say you should minimize all your processed food. And processed food means, can you imagine this food in its original form? So if it's an apple, can you look at it and imagine it was on a tree? If it's a chicken, can you look at it and imagine, oh, this is a dark moment, but imagine that it used to, run around in a flock. Once it has been apart and maybe reassembled into something like a commercial apple fritter or toaster pastry or something that is, again, handled and has gone through different stages of change, that would be what we call a processed food. And that often requires the incorporation of salt and agents to keep it from drying out, agents to support no changes in color. So those things are kind of worrisome. And it doesn't say that you're going to keel over by Thursday if you eat them, but in the big picture, the more original your food, the better. But I wouldn't go with avoid all processed foods. Okay, next one. Myth number 7. Multigrains and whole grains are the same. Aha. Now, I had a few pictures in mind for this one, but let me just kick it around with you. If something is whole grain, it means that it is the kernel, the seed that has been ground up, made into a flour, and everything that was in that seed is still in that flour. It could also be ground up into a flour, and then in the milling process, using screens and fans, you blow the flour through different finer meshes until you get the finest one. And that's often what we call white flour. Now, I could combine that white flour with a sprinkling of oatmeal or a sprinkling of something, and I could call it multi-grain, but it isn't really whole grain because it's the white flour plus, something fancy. Could also be colored brown. So here's what you do. You look for the words 100% whole grain on the label, and there is a federal law that says it has to conform to certain definitions to get to use those words. You also want to say, per serving, does it have about 3 grams of fiber? Multigrain may not. And so if you have a multigrain bread that you buy and you like it, that's fine. It's not hurting you. It's that good stuff. But it isn't the same. It possibly is not the same as the whole grain. Pardon. So look for approximately 3 grams of fiber per serving. Hope that was a good one. Myth number 8. Eggs are bad for your health. So again, I do know we went through something a couple of years back about the revisions on nutrition guidelines. The American Heart Association still recommends that you have no more than 5 to 6 egg yolks per week. But so that doesn't tell us that eggs are going to cause a heart attack. In fact, if you want, the egg industry will send you an email a newsletter into your email at least once a week with all the studies and coupons and whatnot about how eggs are excellent for your health and they're not going to give you a heart attack. So they have had a bum rap for their cholesterol. And it turns out that it doesn't raise the risk of heart disease. If you enjoy eggs, eggs are very good for protein, very good for other vitamins. Eggs are not a good source of iron, even though it's mentioned often. And here's why. Once again, the egg has a function before it gets to our kitchen table, which is to become a chick. And the iron in the egg is bound up in a complex that as humans, we can't release it and get it into our bodies. It's in something called avidin. And that actually is so that the chick can use the iron for its own development. So the egg has got iron in it, but we don't extract it. We can't pull it out and use it for ourselves. So our eggs bad? No. Okay, next one. Myth number. A gluten-free diet is good for everyone. So the question here is there might be someone who needs to mute their. Okay. Gluten is a protein in wheat. It's also in other grains, including barley and rye. And there's a very similar protein in oat. It's not specifically gluten, but it's very, very similar. And for some people, they experience a variety of symptoms which they are quite confident is coming from eating gluten. It could be belly distress. And we're not talking necessarily someone who has been diagnosed with celiac, which is a gluten allergy, but where someone might get bloating, or some people feel like it causes acne, or it gives them kind of an eczema-like effect, a skin effect. So the best thing to do is say, avoid gluten sources for 14 days and see if you feel better. See if you note any change. And if not, then just keep it down to a minimum. And you can find lots of foods which are of similar nutritional profile that can make a difference for you. So that, like rice, quinoa, which is technically not a grain in the grain family of rice and corn and so on. So I would go ahead and say gluten-free is not necessary for everyone. But I know there's some fascinating theories about how, as human beings evolved from gatherers and hunters to domesticating crops and becoming an agricultural societies, that some conditions began to emerge that didn't happen in the wild. Well, okay. I don't avoid gluten. But if I thought it might make a difference, I would definitely eliminate it for a while and see. And if you know someone who does want to avoid gluten pretty exclusively, America's Test Kitchen has a great recipe for a blend of flours that you can use to make the foods that you might make if you were cooking with normal conventional wheat flour. The website makes you create an account, but I know I have also seen it on YouTube. So I think if you keep looking for America's Test Kitchen gluten-free flour blend, you'll find it for free. Okay, next one, myth number 10. You have to stop eating at a certain time at night in order to lose weight. So here this is kind of close to true. Close to true. Here's the deal. Your body doesn't shut down at night by any stretch. It slows down a bit. And as this particular source says, you do have sort of slower digestion. But if you're going to be hungry and you're going to be uncomfortable, it's okay to eat. It's not going to cause harm. But it turns out that there are strategies of restricting your eating to a certain length of time during the day, somewhere between 8 and 10 hours. That means that you would have a 14 to 16-hour fast, fasting being, again, in quotes, consumption of nothing with calories. And once again, there are many people who are quite convinced that this is how we as humans evolved, not eating for 14 to 16 hours, and that is really metabolically, so to speak, the normal way we should be. So those of us who kind of graze and take snacks until we fall asleep and then start eating early in the morning, what are the consequences of that? May cause or may be associated with what's called insulin resistance. May not. And people with insulin resistance may experience weight gain. And if you restrict your eating to a certain block of time, two things happen. A, you won't eat as much because there's only so much you can eat in 8 hours. And secondly, your body's sensitivity to insulin improves. So I have another slide. The restricted eating is one of the categories of fasting. And fasting actually has some support in current medical literature. There's do's and don'ts. One of the don'ts is don't starve yourself for 10, 12 days, because what'll happen is your resting energy expenditure just gets slower, and you actually burn fewer calories in 24 hours than you would have had you not been fasting. Fasting means don't go down to 500 to 1,000 calories and try to live on that for an extended period of time. Now, interesting other ways of fasting, which once again have been medically scrutinized and found to be effective, is that every other day you only eat 500 calories. And then on the alternate day, you eat anything you want. No, anything sounds like, are you kidding me? I mean, can I go to International House of Pancakes? Can I shove, well, we don't have to dream, but it does say anything. Only eating 500. And this seems to be reasonably effective for people who have trying to get rid of belly fat. And belly fat is not just fat on your tummy, but it may well be what is called intra-abdominal fat, meaning it's not only not on the outside of your body, it's around the organs of your midriff. And that intra-abdominal fat is wicked. Just creates problems. So this alternate day fast may be a lot logistical and reasonable solution. But let me note, on the 500 calorie day, many people experience nausea and headaches. And is it worth it? Okay. If you find alternate day fasting tough, then there's the pardon me, the light version. And light says 7 days, you pick 2 that you only eat 500 calories. They should not be consecutive. And on the other 5 days, you eat reasonably. Sounds like it's now, what should those 500 consist of? I don't have a regimen that says this, 2 servings of this and a half a cup of that. It should just be reasonable food that's going to make you feel satisfied as much as possible for those 24 hours. Now, the third kind of fasting that has actually, once again, been very thoroughly scrutinized in medical journals is called intermittent fasting. This is where you have the 8 hours, some go 10, and essentially you're eating, and I'm going to use air quotes, anything, and then eat for 16 hours. Or at least you don't have anything with calories. And the medical literature is full for the last 15 years or more with outcomes for intermittent fasting related to improving diabetes, improving weight, improving cholesterol, improving quite a few things. But these are all variations on a theme of saying, is it really a good idea to keep eating throughout the day, all day long, into the night until you fall asleep? And the answer seems to be your body would be happier if you limited your eating to a certain time frame. Okay. Now, while we're on this thing about eating and fat and time frame, does grapefruit or cayenne pepper or vinegar really burn fat? Nah, it doesn't. Okay. Don't we wish, on the other hand, if it did burn fat, then you can see abuse just begging to happen. Having vinegar or grapefruit to the point of like someone who has an eating disorder. So it's good food. It's part of the human array of food, but it is not necessarily going to burn fat. Next one, myth number 11. Cranberry juice is a cure for urinary tract infection. Well, no, but there is an association that cranberry juice or something in cranberry can prevent the adhesion of certain bacteria to the inside of the bladder. But if you have a urinary tract infection, my friend, you really need urgent care. Some evidence suggests that having a cranberry source helps to prevent the frequency or maybe altogether prevent urinary tract infections because it keeps the certain bacteria from attaching to the lining of the bladder. But nevertheless, it is not a cure for urinary tract infection. The word infection right away says that some kind of colonies of bacteria have figured out how to install themselves and overgrow and not be kept in check by the other bacteria that live in our bodies. And that means you need a kind of antibiotic that will help to reestablish the normal colonies and take care of the pathogenic bacteria. Okay, going to go on to myth number 12. All right, honey and maple syrup and coconut sugar are better than sugar. Well, sugar is sugar. What makes it sugar means that it stimulates the sweet receptors in the mouth. It also is composed of either glucose or fructose or any of the other oses, galactose, maltose, dextrose. And while the darker sugars may have a little bit of the molasses still in them because they haven't been bleached or they haven't been cleansed more, in general, dietitians will say your overall carbohydrate intake, including your choice of sweeteners, is something you just want to manage. It's not something that you can say, oh, I'll eat all I want of this because it has no consequence. It's all going to be carbohydrate going into your intestines, getting into your circulation as glucose, and then move it from your bloodstream into your cells. Does one perform better in your favorite recipe? Or is one more reminiscent of the foods of your childhood? None of those issues are determinants of the health or safety of sugar, but can keep in mind that sugar is sugar. And if we have question and answer later, that's fine. Okay, myth number, oh, we're out of myths. Okay. So there's another kind of strange way of looking at food that humans have been using for hundreds and thousands, I could say thousands, but certainly hundreds of years. And something called the doctrine of signatures. Excuse me. Essentially, it says, if a food or something edible looks like a body part, then you can use that food or that edible item to treat problems with that body part or to nourish that body part. And currently, some people will defend it as these are what indigenous people have been doing and they're healthy and we shouldn't criticize them. But I'm going to say, in terms of science, does not hold up. It's interesting and hardly ever dangerous unless you are replacing true medical intervention with an herb or a plant or a leaf. One of the things that's kind of funny is that we all know Metamucil helps if you're constipated, and Metamucil can be extracted, or psyllium, which is the product, from a weed, and you can collect the weed anywhere almost all year long here in New York. It's called plantain, the weed, but that doesn't mean that we should use it as in place of medical care. So I'm going to move on. This is describing when the doctrine of signatures was considered medical care, and then as we've reached modern times, when it's considered pseudoscience. Even some today will call it absurd or fanciful or far-fetched, but pseudoscience works. And the doctrine of signatures applies to other things, but with food signatures in this case. And what it falls into, some other, deep thinkers say it's like a mnemonic, which is important to pre-literate cultures. So mnemonic is that way that you make up a sentence to remember the names of the planets, which I can't remember this sentence. I have an example of a mnemonic, I think, in my next slide. But noting it says pre-literate cultures. So until you were able to have a medical system which continues to evolve to get better and better, pre-literate cultures would have said, oh, that flower has a petal that's the shape of and then, fill in the blank, it must be good. And it also had this signature of doctrine of signatures had a very religious kind of support. saying that God made it easy for humans to know what to use for healing by making the food reflective of the body part. I will go back to my position that it is pseudoscience. If it happens to be useful, that's fine, but it is not considered the okay. By the way, so this is a mnemonic. If I hold my knuckles out, because how many of us ever sit around and wonder which of the months have 31 days and which don't? So it looks here like on every knuckle you have a 31-day month, and on the space between the knuckles you have a 30-day, and except for February. I think that's kind of funny. But anyway, we're moving back to food. So here's a big splash about the doctrine of food signatures. I'm going to come back, I'm going to go forward with it, but these are some examples. If I looked at circulation, if a strawberry cut down the center looks like the circulatory system, would you consider eating strawberries as a way to heal or nourish your circulatory system? No, not uniquely. Okay, but there are some foods that look like body parts, and they are in this thing. And I thought I would add this one, including the date it was published and the author. 10 foods that look like body parts that they're good for. Starting with the carrot and the eye. Okay. I frankly never cut a carrot across the center and looked down the center and said, oh, that looks like an eye. But okay, that's not, I look at the carrot as something completely different.
Already.
I'm saying this is a carrot cake begging to be made. Okay. But so if you see those circular configurations and they remind you of the pupil and all of that, but in fact, eating a carrot is not going to help your sight. Beta carotene or vitamin A, when it's deficient, can be responsible for a drying of the eye. And when the eye gets very dry, it can actually lead to scarring and blindness. And that is tragic because it didn't have to happen. But eating a carrot is not going to make you go from 20/40 to 20/20. It doesn't affect that eye function. It's more like the development of the eye and the sustainability of the structures of the eye, but it doesn't make you see better. But you know, who's going to pick a fight with a carrot? Not me. Go ahead, eat those carrots. Okay. Oh, one other thing about carrots. People who have what is called night blindness. Night blindness means not just that you have a hard time seeing in the dark, but if I shine a bright light in your eye and then remove the light, it takes you a long time to adapt to being able to see everything else in the dark. So that delayed adaptation. And that is sometimes a symptom of certain eye diseases, but it can also be a symptom of vitamin A deficiency. So yeah, carrots got a role because of the beta carotene. But you could eat a ton of carrots and still need glasses. So, so you buy cute glasses. All right, the walnut in the brain. Again, here's a kind of a stretch. First of all, walnuts are not all over the world. And the person who pulled a walnut off a tree, then broke open the shell, I doubt if they looked to the heavens and said, thank you, Lord, for providing me with something to make my brain healthy. But this is the whole idea of doctrine of signature. There is omega-3 fat in the walnut. It's called alpha-linolenic acid, and there's some other minerals. It's a good food, but it's not going to exceptionally nourish your brain. Okay, celery and bones. So one example is that celery contains sodium and that bones have a high sodium content. I think I could sell that. Celery contains silicon and bones contain. Now, here's what we do with bones. You need good physical activity, which is part of assuring that bone mineral density stays strong. And you need to eat minerals. You need calcium. You need protein for those bones too. So the fact that celery is sort of not stringy, but long and skinny like a bone, it's a coincidence. It's good food. probably something we should all also have more frequently. Sorry. Avocado in the uterus. Is anyone else with me? That's kind of a stretch. Okay, but the one of the connections is that avocado has folic acid, and folic acid has some role in protecting the uterus from something. You can get folic acid from lots of foods that are not shaped like a uterus. So get folic acid for sure, but I wouldn't knock down an avocado a day or an avocado a week with the expectation that it's making my uterus happy. But here's an example of the doctrine of signatures. Here's another. Clams and testicles. Okay. So there's zinc in clams. And zinc deficiency is associated with reproductive disorders in parts of the world where people have zinc deficiencies. But if you eat clams every day for zinc, you're not going to have a better, let's say, sperm count or have a better sexual function. It doesn't go that way. In addition, a lot of zinc on a daily basis can raise your cholesterol. So if you like clams, enjoy, but not with the expectation that it's going to make anyone more sexually successful. All right, what about grapefruit and breast? I want you to know I did not create this list. I'm actually borrowing it from an online source. But I thought to myself, I would hope that someone publishing this would offer at least a few warnings that this is not the way to assure that you're going to have guaranteed well-being, and then definitely go get that mammogram as recommended. So they're saying that limonoids, which are something that occurs in citrus fruit, is somehow related to protecting the breast from cancer. And what's important is that we know that breast cancer, it can originate from a lot of different things. And sometimes with the complete mystery as to why it occurs. And it's just important not to rest or invest a lot of certainty that.
Please give me a break. This is too much.
Okay, next one, tomatoes and heart. Does that look like a heart? Okay, tomatoes are excellent food, but is it good for your heart? Because it seems to be shaped. And let's move on. Number 8, ginger and stomach. Definitely ginger is good for stomach. It's good for nausea, good for calming a stomach. It's well established to be good for seasickness, motion sickness. But would you walk into the supermarket and look at ginger and say, I see that's a stomach over there, and I think it's going to be good? This is once again the pseudoscience of the idea of a food shaped like an organ. So
God.
moving again away, around the world there are, and across the ages, a lot of interesting things, and I would welcome anyone to throw their ideas out in a minute. I remember someone wrote a paper on foods that are taught to moms around the world to protect their babies from adverse effects. So don't eat eggs because your baby will be born bald. Or don't feed your baby lion meat, or he and she will come fierce. Or a very prominent and still consistent one is hot cold. So a body has a implied temperature. So a child or an infant is hot, and an older person is considered cold. And certain foods are considered hot, and unrelated to what the temperature of the food is. And certain foods are considered cold. And so you should never give an old person something cold or give a child something hot. No, I don't have an example of that. And I have examples. I didn't put them in. I'd love to do a chat about that in any detail if somebody's interested. But it's a way we have been, I would not call it a belief system. Okay, next one. Food safety myths. And these are the ones I'm going to end on. First myth, the last meal I ate is caused my foodborne illness or my food poisoning. It turns out that You could have food poisoning and it doesn't show up for 4 or 5 days, or it could be 4 or 5 hours. Or you could have eaten it for breakfast and you get sick after dinner. So the deal is not to make that assumption without considering other things. So from hours to days for a food and contaminated food to somehow make you sick. It depends on the kind of bacteria, it depends on the conditions. And so we've all heard stories in the news about food poisoning and recalls. And 1,000 people could eat the same food and maybe 105 of them got sick. So it still makes it a very challenging area to narrow down. Let me move on. Another food safety myth. What's the worst that could happen to you if you have an upset stomach? I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? An upset stomach? Well, the answer is, mind you, this is coming from the Food and Drug Administration. Okay. You could have fever, diarrhea, vomiting, dehydration, and we all know that dehydration prolonged is pretty dangerous. So if you're cavalier about saying, I don't know if I don't care, I'll eat it anyway. What's going to happen? I'll just have an upset stomach. Well, you hope it is only an upset stomach, but it could be far more. Once again, it has a lot to do with different kinds of bacteria. Paralysis could be with a food that has a botulism, or the botulinum bacteria family creates a toxin. Okay, let's move on to another food safety myth. Excuse me. Leftovers are safe to eat if they look and they smell okay. Well, we've all been there. I've kind of gone up to it and sniffed it and said, not so sure. How hungry am I? But because, once again, there are different kinds of bacteria, food could look fine and still be very rich in pathogenic stuff. So the bottom line is, if you're not sure, when in doubt, throw it out. If you haven't had it refrigerated for a while, dump it. Even if it doesn't smell bad, even if it hasn't turned green. Okay, here's another one.
No, enough.
Meat is cooked with the juices that run clear, and that's when it's ready. The answer here is running clear is not enough. It has to have reached a certain temperature. So on the right side, I have the thermometer.
Give me a break. It's enough already.
I'm not sure whose Zoom is not muted. So if you're strongly concerned that there's too much detail, I will address that in a question and answer. Okay, the only way to know that meat has been cooked is with a thermometer. Honestly, does everyone own a food thermometer? You should. Can't hurt. It gives you confidence. Okay. Hot hot food can be placed. Oh, it's bad to put hot food in the refrigerator. I think this comes from the old days of having an ice box. And if you put hot food in your ice box, you melted your ice, and then everything was at a lower temperature, or a higher temperature, rather. So the takeaway here is it should be refrigerated no longer than 2 hours after preparation is finished. And if it's a large amount, then put it into smaller containers so that it can be put in the refrigerator and cool off. It's okay to put it in your refrigerator but within the 2 hours. After 2 hours, you might have already had an opportunity for bacteria to start to grow. I hope that's news to everybody and that's something that everyone can use. Okay, when I microwave, the microwaves kill the bacteria. The microwave doesn't do the killing, it's the heat of the microwave that kills it. So it's very similar to the cooking. You need it to get to a certain temperature. And especially meats are no longer pink. It doesn't necessarily mean that the potential bacteria that are harmful have already been destroyed. Okay, next one. I see it's 5 minutes to 2, so I'm going to make sure we get all of our food safety myths. If you let food sit out for more than 2 hours, you make it safe by reheating it until it's really hot. I've done that. So here's what some bacteria produce toxins that are not destroyed by heat. So we go back to the idea of refrigerate it as soon as possible. Okay. Freezing foods kills harmful bacteria that can cause food illness. And the fact here is that freezing it simply makes it stop dividing, but it doesn't kill. Pardon. So that when your food is thawed and the temperature where the bacteria does its best growing, excuse me, is reached somewhere between the thaw and the time you cook it, really important to cook it thoroughly and not pop it back in the freezer. What happens if you pop it back in the freezer after it thawed? Well, it reached the temperature zone. Microorganisms can start to divide. So you put it back in the freezer and you may have, I'm just going to wing it, double the bacteria that you had when it went in the freezer the first time. So now when you thaw it the second time, there's more of a bacterial load. So the deal is, got to cook it all the way and try to keep it frozen or handle it the way it should be all the time. So the part I just mentioned is that you don't want to refreeze because that invites bacterial numbers to grow, go dormant, and then start growing again. So never refreeze raw. What do you do with it? I hate to say you dump it because you're taking a chance. All right. Plastic or glass cutting boards hold more harmful bacteria than wood. So it turns out everything needs to be washed when you're finished cutting food on it. Noting here that glass, granite, hard cutting boards are reasonably safe, but all of them should be washed thoroughly. Yes, wood seems to have the ability to change the potential harmfulness of some bacteria, but you still want to wash it. Okay. Next myth. I eat a vegetarian diet, so I don't have to worry about foodborne illness. So that makes it like all the bad stuff is in cheese and meat and fish. Well, it turns out they can carry a number of things, and it's best that you once again wash it. I do kind of draw a line. What do you call wash? Do you run it under running water, or do you actually take soap or detergent and lather it up and wash your food and rinse it? I'm sure I'd like to know what everyone else does. And it does depend on what the food is, but most of the time running it under cool water is recommended. I usually take an apple or grapes or something because somehow they just look a little grimy. And I actually put a tiny bit of soap in there. And look at there. It says never use detergent or bleach to wash fresh fruits or vegetables. I'm not sure what the FDA had in mind when they say never. But I know that detergents leave a remnant, even when you think you've rinsed them. So maybe there's a caution that contaminant. Okay, another myth. You should always wash bagged lettuce and greens. So here's the deal. They say triple washed or washed, and rewashing could actually be an opportunity for us in our kitchens to incorporate pathogens. And at the same time, we all have heard about recalls when spinach or other lettuce greens have been recalled because the water that's used to irrigate them was contaminated with the E. coli from a nearby, let's say, cattle farm. So the recommendation is that you don't have to. I think that's our own call. Oh, am I going back? Okay. Oh, in fact, my mistake. The previous slide, I actually thought I had deleted because I redid it and added pictures. All right. Food is local, organic, or natural, so it's safe. And so we're thinking, not necessarily. The sanitary practices of every person or every food handler are important. And local and organic doesn't mean that the farmer didn't, or the food handlers didn't wash their hands after going to the bathroom. Okay. And then I don't need to wash my hands since I used hand sanitizing. Well, the takeaway here is effectively kills some germs, but you still need to wash your hands for at least 20 seconds. Okay. We heard that at the beginning of all throughout COVID. I've never been sick from the food I prepare, so I don't need to worry about feeding it to others. Well, that's a different thing about immune systems and age and vulnerability. So you should be just as cautious for offering your food to others, even if you think you're safe from it. Okay, and here's my favorite myth. If you drop food on the floor and you pick it up after 5 seconds, it's okay. I confess I use the 5 second rule, but you got to be cautious. It's not that you can kiss it up to God, because sometimes there are nasty bacteria that are waiting for your food. In a longer discussion about this, it may depend on if it's a dry food or a wet food, a lot of different things, but the general advice is don't use the 5 second rule. If it hit the floor, it's now critter food. Let it go. Okay. Here's one that I always get pushback. You should try not to wash your chicken or your turkey in your sink. And you'd say, that's heresy. Of course, I rub it with vinegar. I give it a rinse. The idea is that there are bacteria that can splash against the side of the sink when you're washing it. And then you may not be as thorough at cleaning up as you think. And maybe you'll then have an apple or some lettuce or something that's not going to be heated to possibly get cross-contamination. That's the basic advice. But I can tell you, for every conference or every seminar that I've gone to, whether I gave it or whether I was a listener, there's a lot of protest. What do you mean I can't wash my chicken? I've been doing it. My mother did it. My grandmother did it. My grandfather did it. So the caution is possible cross-contamination with bacteria splashing against the surfaces around which you're washing. And that is the last of my food myths. And here are references, and I have others if anybody wants one. So may I take this opportunity to ask if there are any questions? How about it,
Yes.
Barbara?
May I ask a question, please? Thank you. Hello?
Yes, yes.
This is General Mills, has a Cheerios. It's 100% whole grain. It sounds great. You know, it has gluten-free, and they have vitamins and minerals in it. But it says not genetically modified, but then they say that there could be there's a potential cross material may be present. That means you might get a little bit of it during manufacturing. And because of all this thing now with Roundup, someone said to me, well, you shouldn't eat this General Mills Cheerios because of the Roundup, even though it's saying non-genetically modified. But it does say there might be, it says here, also known as genetically engineered material may be present due to potential cross-contact during manufacturing and shipping. And I'm just wondering, because I do eat this every day, maybe I should not be eating it because of this problem about Roundup in the soil that they use. Okay.
I'm going to start at the first part, which is if I eat Cheerios too, and I don't worry about it, but I don't have an allergy to gluten. So I think what they're covering their assets, if you get my drift, by saying,
yes, gluten-free,
so
they say.
Cheerios don't have any gluten, but because it's in a factory where wheat products are also,
you don't like it.
There's a potential for some gluten, a tiniest bit, to be
It's not green.
And therefore you could
black.
Probably
no, the stars are not black. They're like a brown.
Oh,
Barbara.
Yeah, well, they're not green. I wouldn't do that.
Can you go on star 6, somebody
Okay.
that's talking about her?
Oh. No, Barbara. She'll be off. She's running the show, so I think
yeah.
Sorry. Well, the problem is even though it says gluten-free, I'm just worried about the Roundup.
So let me go over Roundup with everybody.
Thank you.
Roundup is so if I'm if I'm a farmer and I got like 10,000 acres, I totally made that number up. of something like corn. I don't want weeds to compete with my corn and take
Yeah.
oil. Okay. So I need something that'll block those weeds from growing, that's not going to block my corn from growing. You with me?
But
They have been carefully, I'm going to say carefully because I don't have a
Oh,
better.
that's interesting. Okay, because I don't see that at all.
Barbara.
Okay. And that would be a problem because green would look awful.
So, right. Okay, so back to Roundup. So there's a way to generate a set of chemicals that will interfere with the hormones of the plant. I'm sorry, the weed. So we all look outside our window and we see some weeds look like grass, some weeds look like dandelions, and because they're also in the same botanical family, some look like ivy. So each of those plants has a certain hormonal signal that tells them when to send out their first bud, whether it's going to be a leaf or a blade or a, like, what would you call it for something like a palm tree, whatever, a frond.
Right.
And study the hormones that tell those plants when to release their first buds, blades. And so they kind of have a hormone in a product that Roundup block the growth of certain kinds of weeds. Now, in the outside chance that the corn could also be impaired by that, they then genetically
because they should be, because I'm pretty sure I use this as, pick the logo thing.
Maybe I'll send her a text. Genetically breed corn that won't be affected by the Roundup hormone activity. And I get with you. I'm a little squirmish about that. The company swears on a stack of everything. That not putting anything in there that's going to affect a person as they eat it. And yet there's a couple of examples of people who have been agricultural workers who had a high exposure to it, and then it affected their health. I'm actually happy to find something that hasn't been grown with Roundup. And the seed that was planted in the soil wasn't what they ready. And that's why I also appreciate the information on the label that says
when we download, let me take a look.
I can't. What did you say? Excuse me.
I know. I know it's time to end because it's 2:07.
There is. I do have one where what I do is I created one that you can do without the the background.
I too.
So I use that.
And something which has no Roundup, or
there's a lot of space around it, but you can then adjust the size to fit whatever. Yeah.
I don't think she got my text.
Unless we should be making this larger on here so that it fits when we download it.
For hanging on for my attempt at a short answer. I'm never good at short answers, and I apologize.
Yeah.
But have I offered a decent explanation?
Well, I think basically what you're saying is that it's all right because it's different than when a person is working with it.
Yeah.
When they're working. But that if you're in the food, it's so many things are done anyway that it's basically it sounds like it's okay in the food. Am I wrong? I don't know.
You're so right. That they test
our expertise for any reason.
They test on rats. They test on insects. But I'm like you. I said, okay, I can take the scientific objective answer and say it's supposed to be safe, but I'm still feeling a little squirmy about it.
No, because I have no clue as to how to do what I should be looking for.
And they control their weeds with lemon juice or lemon extract, and it costs about 5 times what a over-the-counter weed killer is at Home Depot. It works, but it's so much more expensive. So that means that her wine is going to have to cost more.
Yeah, especially if they have the 50 in black, any of the lettering in black or something. But
the business, you have to weigh
the
cost of going organic, and sometimes
Yes.
prohibitive because the consumers aren't going to want to.
Right. You have one all in black, one all in white. Yeah.
So could you just put it in a few words?
Yes. Yeah, unless we went in and just made several copies and all different. That's not how it works. Yeah.
Is that Kathleen, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so basically, since it's a product.
Yeah, no, I can't argue with that.
The product is okay. It's the if a person is working in the field with Roundup, it's different from when you're getting a product.
Right.
Yes, and I'm answering your question as a dietitian. That I am reading the same scientific stuff that everybody that is published, and drawing a conclusion. Well, I consider the educated guess, and I'm saying it isn't supposed to hurt.
Here, let me get this. It's Maudine. She's just finishing up. All right, bye. Hello.
Hi, Barbara. I need you to mute yourself.
Yes.
Okay, bye. Okay, so.
Oh, sorry.
It's very hard to hear with that other person. It was so hard for me to hear you with that other person talking so loud. So could you just say it in a few words?
We're still on Roundup.
Sorry.
Yes, the Roundup is a fascinating way of manipulating a plant to not grow. At the same time, you are hopefully offering another plant a way to escape the manipulation. I don't know if that had made it any easier.
No, I only want to know if the Cheerios, they're 100% whole grain. It's by General Mills. It's in a box in front of me now.
Okay.
I just want to know. I eat this every day. It says non-genetically modified, but there could be some cross-contamination. I just want to know if once it's in the product, is that okay then?
I'd say we're okay. If you don't have an allergy, if you're not well aware of an allergy to gluten or any other any allergies at all, let's put it, I have to be very general because I don't think I'm equipped to give you something more medical.
No, I'm only concerned about the Roundup if it's carcinogenic.
No, I think you're okay. I think you're okay.
With the product. Okay, thank you.
If you go in Home Depot because you have a garden and a good number of raised bed gardens, leave that one on the shelf in the store and pull your weeds by hand, and I think we're all good. I'll go eat your food. Yeah.
Would you eat something? Would you eat the product then?
I'm not sure if I haven't been eating it all for years anyway. It's just not new. It's been out there. And again,
it's fortified with vitamins and minerals. It's hard for me to find something organic.
I eat Cheerios all the time. Yeah. So I think you're safe. I think you can take a breath, exhale, and say Cheerios are okay on my breakfast table.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other question? There was Kathleen had a question.
Yes, thank you, Maudine. Which yogurts are good for someone who is lactose intolerant?
So you can go to get the low lactose yogurts that are a bit more expensive. I think they're Lactaid brand here in New York. I think in the Midwest there's something called Dairy Ease. But generally, yogurt is better tolerated for people who are lactose intolerant than regular fluid milk, because the process of I want to say fermentation, that's as close as I can get right now, breaks some of the lactose down so that there isn't as much lactose in it as it would be if it was regular fluid milk. The culturing of the milk, that's what I want to say. So the best brands, in fact, I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to let Google answer this for me, because why not? I was going to go on the web, but let me just stay focused with you. There are brands that you probably can find that are low lactose or no lactose yogurt, but in general, yogurt is better absorbed and more comfortably consumed by people with lactose intolerance than fluid milk or ice cream.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I see something in the chat. I'm not sure if that's a question. Oh, Barbara, we can hear you. Okay. Let's see. Anyone else? Because we are over the official time. And I don't have to hurry up and get out of town, so I can stay and answer a few more. Or did anybody heard any other food myths that they'd like us to kick around?
Well, I appreciate your presentation very much, and I'm sorry for my heart hurt for some of the inadvertent comments that we were hearing. But my one question was, when you're talking about the intermittent fasting and the insulin resistance, and that maybe it could decrease maybe waist circumference or
belly fat.
Yeah, belly fat. My concern was the opposite. I tried the intermittent fasting and felt like maybe it created a tummy that I didn't have before. Do you have thoughts on that?
I don't know. I got to think about that for a second. There's got to be a reason.
Because I used to kind of do the eat all the time kind of throughout the day, and I had a very small, kind of non-existent tummy or waist. And then I did the intermittent fasting. Now I have a big old belly. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to go. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have tried to fix what wasn't broken. Maybe I should go back and kind of eat throughout the day and not put my body under the stress with maybe the cortisol, increasing that fat around my stomach because of the stress of not eating. I don't know.
I'm writing a note to myself to see who I can ask that question to.
I would love that, Maudine. This is Amy Barrett.
Amy.
Do you want me to put my email in chat?
If you do that, that's good. If everyone else doesn't mind getting it.
I'll just send it directly to you.
Okay, that's good. So you're so grazing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Allowed you to have a nice flat tummy and be adequately fed. But if you did the intermittent fasting, you seem to develop a belly.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna
much to my chagrin.
Yeah. That's not as I would have predicted, but that just means I need to explore. So
I'd appreciate that. My mom does have type 2 diabetes, and I haven't been diagnosed, but I do have some blood sugar issues, I think. But thank you very much for looking into it. I did send you just my email to you.
At Gmail. Okay. The last 66223. I'm not going to need the first letter.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Appreciate these talks.
You can nudge Barbara if you don't hear from me.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
I just had a quick question. I apologize. I have one person on the phone. I do have to get everybody's name. Can you just let me know what your name is? One person who's only on the phone.
It says call in user.
Call in user.
Call in user. Okay. Well, they're still here.
Yeah, I know. And they ask a question. I just know we just need to have your name for our attendance.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, Maudine, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Thank you,
we'll
Maudine.
be in touch
appreciate
soon.
it. Appreciate your
Thanks,
presentations
Maudine.
always.
You look beautiful, Maudine.
Yes, she do. She looks good. Yes, she do. As always. Okay, bye.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Barbara, do you need to meet for anything for cooking?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, have a good weekend.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.